My husband leaned close to me in the middle of a crowded hall and whispered, "After tonight, you will lose everything." I froze. It felt like someone shut off my breath. The music kept playing. People kept laughing. Glasses kept clinking. But I couldn't hear anything anymore. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in 25 years, I didn't recognize the man I was married to. There was no love there. No regret. No hesitation. Only cold certainty. As if everything had already been decided. As if I was just another item in his plan. And in that moment, I knew. This night wasn't a celebration. It was a trap. I'm glad you're here. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and write your city in the comments below. Because this story isn't just about me. One day, it might save someone else. That morning, I woke up happy. Not cautiously happy. Not the fragile kind that comes after years of disappointment. I woke up calm. The kind of calm that settles in when you believe your life is solid, when you think nothing important can still collapse. Sunlight slipped through the curtains in thin, pale lines, landing on the dresser where our wedding photo still stood. I remember noticing how dust had gathered in the corner of the frame and thinking I should clean it later, before guests arrived. 25 years. Our silver anniversary. I lay there for a moment, listening to the house breathe. The kettle clicked off downstairs. A drawer closed. Footsteps crossed the kitchen floor. Familiar sounds, softened by routine and time. I thought, we made it. Not triumphantly. Quietly. The way you feel when you realize a storm passed while you were asleep. I stood in front of the mirror and adjusted my dress slowly, carefully. The fabric was soft against my skin, forgiving in the places my body had changed. I studied my reflection without judgment, the faint lines around my mouth, the tired crease between my brows that never fully disappeared anymore. We've been through so much, I whispered to myself. Career failures. Late bills. Silent dinners after arguments neither of us knew how to finish. We lost things we never spoke about out loud. We accepted disappointments without naming them. We learned how to move forward without looking too closely at what we left behind. And we're still standing, I added, smoothing the dress once more. Downstairs, the house smelled of coffee and sugar. Brian's mother, Linda, had arrived early with boxes of pastries she insisted on arranging herself. I could hear her humming, a sound that always made me feel like a guest in my own home. Brian was joking in the kitchen, his voice light, practiced. He laughed easily that morning, too easily, but I didn't question it. I told myself it was nerves, excitement, pride. Friends were already sending messages. Old photos. Congratulations. Little heart emojis from people who hadn't seen us struggle but believed they knew our story. Everything looked perfect. The flowers. The table settings. The carefully chosen music playing softly in the background. I walked through the house checking details the way I always did, straightening napkins, adjusting chairs, wiping a countertop that was already clean. I had always believed that if I kept things in order, life would follow. I had no idea that order was an illusion. I had no idea that every smile around me was temporary. I had no idea that the man joking beside me was already preparing to take everything I had built, quietly, legally, without raising his voice. That morning, I believed I was celebrating a marriage. I didn't know I was attending its execution. The first warning came earlier that same day. It didn't arrive with shouting or accusations. There was no raised voice. No slammed doors. That's why it took me a moment to understand it was a warning at all. We were standing in the kitchen, the house already half prepared for the evening. Linda was talking about seating arrangements, insisting certain guests shouldn't sit too close together. Her voice filled the space easily, confidently, as if she owned the room. Brian stood beside the counter, holding a glass of water. He wasn't drinking it. His fingers were wrapped around the glass too tightly, his knuckles pale, as if he needed the pressure to keep himself steady. Without turning toward me, without even lowering his voice, he said. After dinner, we need to talk. Seriously. The words slid into the room quietly. Too quietly. I smiled automatically, the way you do when you don't yet realize you're supposed to be afraid. About what? I asked lightly. He shrugged. A small, careless movement. Just, some things we need to sort out. That was all. No explanation. No reassurance. No, don't worry. His tone wasn't tense or emotional. It was neutral. Flat. Almost administrative. The tone people use when the outcome has already been decided. Something tightened in my chest. I waited. I truly believed he would soften it. That he would turn, meet my eyes, add a joke, squeeze my hand, anything to signal that we were still on the same side. He didn't. He took a small sip of water and turned back to his mother, continuing the conversation as if he hadn't just shifted the ground beneath my feet. I stood there nodding along to Linda's voice, my attention no longer on the words but on the feeling spreading through my body. Cold. Heavy. Familiar. It was the same sensation I used to get years ago, right before bad news arrived, before layoffs, before rejected loans, before moments when life quietly closed a door without warning. This wasn't the first time. Over the past year, there had been small moments I tried not to name. Decisions announced instead of discussed. Plans revealed after they were already set. A growing habit of telling me things instead of asking me. I told myself it was stress. Work pressure. Age. I told myself every marriage goes through seasons. But standing there, in my own kitchen, on the morning of our anniversary, I understood something I had been avoiding. This wasn't stress. This was distance. When I looked at his hand again, I noticed it was trembling slightly. The surface of the water quivered, barely visible unless you were watching closely. For a brief second, I thought I saw fear. But then I realized, it wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of being interrupted. Fear that something might go wrong before he finished what he had already started. That was when the truth settled in, slow and undeniable. He had already decided everything. Whatever he planned to say that night had been prepared in advance. Structured. Possibly rehearsed. Approved by people whose names I didn't yet know. I wasn't part of the decision. I was the final step. The realization didn't come with panic. It came with a hollow calm. The kind that arrives when your body understands danger before your heart catches up. I forced myself to breathe evenly. To smile when someone spoke to me. To continue checking details for the evening as if nothing had changed. But something had shifted. A line had been crossed. And although I still didn't know the full shape of what was coming, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The man I was married to was no longer standing beside me. He was standing across from me. Waiting for the right moment to act. When I noticed his hand trembling around the glass, something inside my chest tightened. It wasn't fear yet. It was recognition. That small, almost invisible shake pulled me backward in time, not gently, but with force, like a door suddenly opening to a room I had sealed years ago and pretended no longer existed. I had seen his hands tremble before. Years earlier, when we were still students, living in a narrow apartment with thin walls and a refrigerator that rattled louder than it cooled. We stood at the kitchen table late at night, papers spread out, coins lined in uneven rows. He had just lost a part-time job. Rent was due. The future felt like a question neither of us knew how to answer. His hands shook then, too. I remember reaching across the table and covering them with mine. "It'll be okay," I said. "I've got us." And I meant it without hesitation. Back then, believing felt natural. Sacrifice felt temporary. Love felt like something you proved by enduring discomfort together. I took extra shifts. Accepted responsibilities I hadn't planned for. Learned how to stretch money until it felt like a skill carved into my bones. I learned how to stay calm when panic would have been easier. When he decided to focus on building his career, I didn't argue. I adjusted. I told myself that support was love, and love meant stepping back when it wasn't your turn to move forward. When opportunities appeared for only one of us, I made sure they went to him. I don't remember ever sitting down and formally agreeing to this arrangement. There was no conversation, no negotiation. It happened quietly, gradually, the way water reshapes stone, so slowly you don't notice until the shape is completely different. There were losses along the way. Things we never announced. Dreams we folded and stored away without ceremony. Plans that dissolved into silence rather than decisions. We learned how to grieve privately. I remember nights when we lay awake in the dark, not touching, staring at the same ceiling, both pretending sleep would fix what we were too tired to name. We didn't argue much. We simply adapted. We became efficient at avoidance. And still, I stayed. I stayed because commitment, to me, meant endurance. Because leaving never registered as an act of self-respect, it felt like failure. Because I believed that standing beside someone during the hardest years earned you a permanent place in the good ones. I believed loyalty accumulated value. That patience would be recognized. That love, once proven, could not be erased. Standing there in the kitchen on our anniversary morning, watching his hand tremble again, all of that history returned, not as nostalgia, but as explanation. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the final stage of a pattern I had mistaken for partnership. I had given time, energy, stability. Parts of myself I never thought to inventory. And somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing those things as gifts. He started seeing them as guarantees. That realization didn't arrive with rage. It arrived with clarity. The fear I felt wasn't about losing him. It was about finally understanding how much of myself I had already given away, quietly, willingly, without ever asking what it was costing me. It didn't begin with betrayal. That is the most dangerous part. It began with correction. Small remarks, delivered calmly, almost thoughtfully, as if he were helping me improve rather than slowly erasing me. You look tired lately. Maybe you should take better care of yourself. That color used to suit you more. He never raised his voice. Never sounded cruel. He spoke like someone offering guidance, not judgment. And because I trusted him, I accepted it. I told myself this was what long marriages looked like: honesty, adjustment, realism. Then the remarks became more frequent. Not just about my appearance, but about my presence. You talk too much when you're nervous. You don't need to comment on everything. Sometimes silence is more attractive. I started noticing myself shrinking. Lowering my voice. Pausing before speaking. Watching his face for approval the way I once watched teachers. Then the comparisons arrived. Never direct. Never obvious. He spoke about other women casually, in passing, like background noise. Claire from accounting is very disciplined. She really knows how to present herself. Some women understand when to step aside and let a man focus. Each sentence was light. Reasonable. Easy to dismiss. But together, they formed a quiet message: be less. Take up less space. Become easier. I didn't argue. I adjusted. Somewhere along the way, I stopped buying clothes I liked. I stopped wearing lipstick unless there was an occasion. I stopped laughing loudly. I told myself I was maturing. Then came the phone. He used to leave it anywhere, on the nightstand, the kitchen counter, plugged in beside the couch. Suddenly, it was always face down. Always locked. Always within reach. If I asked who had called, he smiled. Work. If I glanced at the screen, he tilted it away without looking at me. These things are confidential, he said once, lightly. You wouldn't understand the details. The words landed quietly but stayed with me. You wouldn't understand. After that, I stopped asking. Then came the absences. Meetings that ran late but produced no stories. Dinner skipped without explanation. Weekends when he was exhausted yet somehow energetic enough to leave alone. I learned when questions irritated him. I learned which tone shut conversations down. I learned that silence kept the peace. And then there was Claire. Young. Efficient. Always nearby. She appeared at events she had no reason to attend. She laughed at his jokes a fraction of a second too early. She stood close enough that her arm brushed his, lingered just long enough to feel intentional. I told myself I was being paranoid. Until one afternoon, by the mailbox, a neighbor stopped me. She hesitated before speaking, eyes darting toward the street. I didn't know whether to say anything, she said carefully. But I thought you should know. I saw your husband with another woman. They looked very comfortable together. Her voice was gentle. Almost apologetic. I thanked her and went inside. I didn't cry. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the surface where I had once planned meals, balanced budgets, built a shared life. That was the moment something settled into place. The criticism. The secrecy. The distance. They weren't accidents. They weren't misunderstandings. They were preparation. And I had mistaken erosion for normal change, until there was almost nothing left to stand on. By the time evening came, I had learned how to breathe again. Not naturally. Deliberately. Each breath was measured, controlled, as if my body no longer trusted instinct. I moved through the house with practiced calm, welcoming guests, accepting congratulations, nodding at familiar phrases people repeat at anniversaries. 25 years, that's rare. You two are such an example. You must be so proud of what you've built together. Lucky. That word followed me all night. Brian stayed close, but never too close. His hand rested on my shoulder when people were watching. It slipped away the moment their attention shifted. Every gesture felt calculated, like choreography rehearsed in advance. I began to observe instead of participate. The way he checked his phone when he thought no one noticed. The way his mother positioned herself between me and certain guests, redirecting conversations before they reached me. The way Claire appeared exactly when he needed assistance, then disappeared again as if summoned by signal. Something was unfolding beneath the surface of the celebration. And I was no longer blind to it. After dinner, while plates were being cleared and dessert arrived untouched on some tables, Brian excused himself to take a call. He didn't look at me when he did. I watched him walk away. Then I went upstairs. The hallway felt longer than usual. Quieter. My footsteps sounded too loud against the carpet. For a moment, doubt flickered, an old habit trying to protect me. I pushed past it. My hands were steady as I opened his laptop. Too steady. I didn't guess passwords. I didn't hesitate. I already knew them. What I found wasn't chaos or carelessness. It was precision. Folders labeled with dates. Emails archived neatly. Documents revised, edited, finalized. Divorce strategies. Property transfers. Financial projections. My name appeared everywhere, reduced to percentages, obligations, liabilities. I scrolled slowly, forcing myself to read every word. Not because I wanted pain, but because I needed clarity. I needed to understand the full scope of what had been prepared while I was still arranging flowers and smiling for guests. This wasn't a decision made in anger. It was a long-term plan. Weeks old. Possibly months. And he hadn't built it alone. His lawyer's name appeared again and again. His mother was copied on emails that discussed timing and optics. There were accounts I didn't recognize, money moved quietly, methodically, under explanations that sounded harmless if you didn't look too closely. A life dismantled in silence. I closed the laptop and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, grief rose sharply, unexpected, disorienting. Not grief for the marriage, but for the woman I had been while this was happening. The woman who trusted, who adjusted, who didn't think to protect herself. Then the grief passed. In its place came something colder. Clearer. I returned downstairs just as Brian was lifting his glass for another toast. Laughter rippled through the room. People turned toward him, expectant. I met his eyes across the space. He hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. That was when I knew he hadn't expected me to find anything yet. I lifted my glass and smiled back. Let him believe the night was still his. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't expose anything. Not yet. While guests laughed and danced, while music swelled and glasses clinked, I began preparing my own move. Quietly. Carefully. With intention. When Brian took the microphone, the room didn't fall silent at once. At first, people were still laughing, finishing conversations, clinking glasses. Someone tapped a fork against a plate, expecting a harmless toast. Then Brian cleared his throat. The sound cut through the room. Chairs stopped moving. Voices faded. One by one, heads turned toward him. Silence settled slowly, like a curtain being drawn. Brian smiled. It was the same public smile I had seen for years, controlled, confident, reassuring. The smile of a man who believed he was about to guide the story exactly where he wanted it to go. Thank you all for being here tonight, he said. 25 years is a long time. A few polite chuckles followed. I watched him closely now. Not as his wife. As an observer. Anniversaries make you reflect, he continued. They force you to ask difficult questions. About honesty. About whether holding on is still the right thing to do. The air shifted. People exchanged looks. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their chair. Brian took a breath, as if preparing for something brave. For a long time, he said, I felt trapped by expectations. By a life that no longer reflects who I truly am. And tonight, I want to be honest, with myself and with all of you. A murmur moved through the room. I want freedom, he said. Freedom to choose happiness. Freedom to choose another future. The word another landed heavily. I don't want to live a lie anymore, he went on, his voice steady. And while I never intended to cause pain, the truth matters. I've met someone else. And I'm ready to start over. Gasps. Someone whispered my name. Someone else whispered, oh my God. I didn't rush. I didn't react immediately. I stood. The movement was simple, quiet, but it sliced through the room more sharply than any sound. Brian's smile faltered. Just for a second. Long enough. Now it's my turn, I said. My voice was calm. Clear. Unapologetic. I walked forward slowly, aware of every eye following me, aware of how the weight I had carried for years was lifting with each step. I didn't plan to speak tonight, I said. But since honesty has suddenly become the theme of the evening, I think the full truth deserves to be heard. I opened the folder in my hands. Not dramatically. Methodically. These are emails, I said, holding them up. Between my husband, his lawyer, and his mother. They discussed timing, strategy, and how this moment would unfold. Brian's face lost color. These are financial documents, I continued. Accounts opened without my knowledge. Assets moved quietly. Property prepared for transfer while I was arranging this celebration. The room breathed in as one. And these, I added, lifting my phone slightly, are messages between my husband and the woman he claims to have recently met. They go back months. Claire stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Phones were already raised. Someone had begun recording. Cameras caught everything Brian had tried to control. This evening, I said, looking directly at him now, was never about courage or truth. It was about control. About humiliating me publicly while protecting yourself privately. Silence fell, thick, absolute. Brian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His mother stared down at her hands. Claire walked out without a word. The lawyer I now recognized near the back moved quietly toward the exit. I closed the folder. I won't discuss this further tonight, I said. But I won't be silent either. I set the folder down. And now, I finished, my voice steady, you're free to leave. I stepped away. Behind me, the room finally exploded, voices rising, questions shouted, judgment unleashed. And for the first time in years, I didn't look back. The silence didn't break all at once. At first, it hovered, thick, suspended, like the air after glass shatters but before it hits the floor. I stood where I was, my hands relaxed at my sides, aware of my own breathing for the first time all evening. Then the room came apart. Voices rose over one another. Chairs scraped back sharply. Someone began to cry without restraint. Another person spoke too loudly, as if volume could repair what had just been destroyed. Names were repeated. Questions overlapped. Judgment spread faster than understanding ever had. I didn't stay to witness it. I turned and walked away, not quickly, not dramatically. Simply because I no longer belonged in that noise. I had already said everything that mattered. Behind me, Brian remained frozen in the moment he had designed so carefully for me. The humiliation he intended to deliver had shifted hands. He stood exposed, stripped of narrative, while I was already moving forward. In the hallway, away from the chaos, my body finally caught up with what had happened. My hands began to tremble, not with fear, but with release. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. For a brief moment, I expected something overwhelming. Grief. Rage. Triumph. None of it came. Instead, there was quiet. A deep, unfamiliar quiet. It felt like the moment after you set down something unbearably heavy and realize your arms are still raised, unsure what to do without the weight they've carried for years. Footsteps passed. Brian's mother walked by first. She didn't look at me. Her shoulders were rounded now, her mouth pressed into a thin line. She said nothing. There was nothing left she could say. Claire rushed past next, heels in her hand, face flushed, eyes wide with panic. She didn't look back either. Whatever fantasy she had stepped into had collapsed under exposure. Brian did not follow. That absence spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. Outside, the night air felt cool and real against my skin. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting it anchor me. Inside, voices still spilled into the hallway, laughter that had turned sharp, questions without answers, the sound of a life reorganizing itself around truth. It already felt distant. I realized then that I felt light. Not happy. Not victorious. Free. The fear I had lived with for years, the fear of being abandoned, of saying the wrong thing, of losing everything, had nowhere left to live. It had already happened. And I was still standing. Later that night, alone in a quiet room, I sat on the edge of the bed and allowed myself to feel what I had delayed for so long. Not heartbreak. Clarity. I thought about the years I had spent adjusting my needs, lowering my voice, explaining myself less and less. I thought about how much effort it takes to hold a marriage together when only one person is still doing the holding. And I understood something that surprised me with its simplicity. I wasn't mourning the end of my marriage. I was mourning the woman who believed endurance was the same as love. The tears came then, not violently, not with despair. They came slowly, steadily, as if my body was releasing something it no longer needed to protect. I slept that night without dreams. And when I woke up, for the first time in years, my chest felt open. Empty, but open. And open, I realized, was enough. I didn't rebuild my life overnight. There was no dramatic morning where everything suddenly made sense. No moment where I woke up fearless, healed, or transformed into someone unrecognizable. What came instead was order. Quiet. Intentional. Earned. In the weeks that followed, I learned how to exist without bracing myself. Without waiting for the next remark, the next withdrawal, the next quiet punishment disguised as indifference. I moved out of the house we had shared, not in anger, but with clarity. I packed only what belonged to me. Not just objects, but decisions. Boundaries. The right to choose what stayed and what did not. My new home was smaller. Brighter. It smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings, not like history trying to hold its ground. I arranged the furniture slowly, deliberately, discovering how much space I needed when no one was asking me to shrink. I started a business I had postponed for years, something modest, practical, entirely mine. No permission required. No one to consult. It grew steadily, not because I pushed it, but because I finally trusted myself. Mornings became quieter. Coffee tasted different when I drank it without tension. Silence stopped feeling like punishment and began to feel like rest. I stopped explaining myself to rooms that weren't listening. I learned how to say no without apology. How to sit with uncertainty without collapsing into fear. How to breathe deeply without checking whether someone approved. People asked if I was lonely. I wasn't. For the first time in decades, I was accompanied by myself. I noticed small things again, the sound of wind through an open window, the weight of a book resting on my lap, the comfort of making plans without defending them. There were difficult days, of course. Grief doesn't vanish just because clarity arrives. But it no longer controlled me. It visited, stayed briefly, and left without rearranging my life. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't look back. The reward wasn't triumph. It was ownership. Ownership of my time. My energy. My future. I had spent years believing strength meant endurance. Now I understood something different. Strength is knowing when to stop carrying what was never meant to be yours. I wasn't rescued. I chose myself. And that choice, quiet, steady, irreversible, became the foundation of everything that followed. This story taught me one simple truth. Love without respect is not love. It is a trap. For years, I believed strength meant endurance. Staying quiet. Adjusting myself so that someone else could feel comfortable. I thought loyalty was measured by how much I could tolerate without leaving. I was wrong. Love that asks you to disappear is not devotion. It is control. The truth rarely arrives loudly. More often, it comes in patterns we excuse, in discomfort we normalize, in instincts we silence because facing them feels too dangerous. A strong woman is not one who survives everything. A strong woman is one who knows when survival is no longer enough. Speaking up did not make me cruel. Walking away did not make me weak. Choosing myself did not make me selfish. It made me free. I did not seek revenge. I did not seek applause. I only chose clarity, and clarity was enough to change my life. Because once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. And once you stop pretending, you stop being trapped. Names, locations, and identifying details in this story have been changed. But the lesson is real. Now tell me. What would you do in my place, stay silent, or fight back? Write your answer in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, stay here. There are more stories like this, stories of women who chose themselves, even late in life, and discovered it was not too late after all.